children were small and they thought something was funny. And then I was happy with the deal on the house, but nevertheless, I was out till 9 o'clock on my birthday, and that was not funny. Putting the bike together.
Ask what you were doing.
I was selling the house, but then I got home and a couple of adult beverages, and
that's what I meant.
For the gifts. All right, we're gonna start streaming in a minute.
Oh, the sun's in my eyes. I just gotta fix this. Not that I hate the sun. It's just
morning, Wanda.
I can't see. Morning, Wanda.
Morning.
Morning, Wanda.
Hi, everyone.
Good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Planning and Development Committee meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order. And does anyone have any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay. Item E, consent agenda. Anyone want to pull anything or discuss anything on this consent agenda? Okay. Approval of regular agenda. I need a mover and a seconder, and
So the motion reads that the agenda be adopted, including consent items as circulated.
Mover and a seconder. Moved by Member Taylor, second by Member Jansen. All in favor? Sorry. Now we move on to G1, planning report, pre-consultation bylaw and updated site plan. Ms. Mandeville.
Thank you, Chair Cox. Good morning, everyone. Basically, we're here today to discuss some changes to the Planning Act. So these are actually changes, legislation that was passed back in the spring. For the returning councillors, you may recall we had our staff report back in June on Bill 109 and some of the impacts it was going to have to the township, as some of the changes came into effect on July 1st. And other ones were and are still slated for a January 1st implementation date. So Bill 109, for those who might remember, who might not, hopefully you saw the link in the staff report to the previous staff report. It contemplated things like having to delegate site plan approval fully to staff. So previous to that report and to our previous situation, site plan control was approved by council unless it was minor residential properties, and those were approved by our director of planning. So the province back in the spring through Bill 109 mandated that site plan control be delegated to staff. But more of the controversial items within this Bill 109 was the refunding of application fees. So essentially under the Planning Act prior to Bill 109, there were certain timelines that had to be met in order to process a complete application. However, there essentially was no penalty for not meeting those timelines, other than the developer or the property owner could appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and it would typically take a long time to get a hearing date. So people didn't really do that unless they really thought their application was stuck. So essentially, Bill 109 says that if you don't approve an application or you don't make a decision on an application within that certain amount of time, you have to refund those fees. So since all of this legislation came in the spring, township staff have been working with other municipalities in an effort to try to come up with creative solutions on how to alter our processes so that we are making decisions or approvals in the case of site plan control within the specified time period so that we don't have to return the fees. So Brad and Emily both did a lot of work on this report, each of them kind of handling one aspect of the report. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily first to talk about the pre-consultation process, both what we had and hopefully what we will have.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to expand on what Katie's already described and the proposed changes that were discussed in the staff report on today's agenda in response to the changes to be implemented by Bill 109. The recommended changes in the report are intended to be a proactive adjustment to our development review process in advance of that January 1st timeline. So to preface, the Township of Severn does currently have an optional or voluntary pre-consultation process that applicants can choose to participate in or request. This means that there's no enforcement or requirement for this to occur prior to the submission of a development application. So super generally, a pre-consultation meeting is a meeting between the development team, township departments and staff, township consultants, and external agencies if necessary. An example typically in Severn is the Ministry of Transportation. So the meeting is to discuss a proposed development concept or proposal before a formal application submission. The pre-consultation process has proven to be hugely beneficial to both the applicant and the township, as it is an opportunity for staff to be made aware of the proposal, have an opportunity to indicate what materials and information and studies are required to be submitted with that application, and to highlight concerns or comments as early in the process as possible. So it can be used as a tool to assist in the review process for applications being received at the township. However, again, at this point in time, it is a voluntary process that is not very detailed, as the meeting is generally occurring at a point in time when the proposal is very conceptual or a service level. So that being said, when applications are being submitted to the township, it might be the first time that staff are being made aware of the proposal, or the required materials and information provided might need to be further clarified or amended. Particularly, there are instances when the documents provided may technically meet the requirements for a complete application through the Planning Act, but the contents of that material don't necessarily satisfy those intricate details of applicable design, industry standards, or legislation. We've run into instances where the application is technically complete, but it's not detailed enough to determine if those municipal and public interests are being protected. So oftentimes this does result in a lot of back and forth between the township and the applicants after an application is submitted, which does eat up a lot of that legislated review timeline out of the control of township staff. So staff might be able to provide comments back to the applicant within a reasonable amount of time, but there's never really any determining how long a response from the development team to address those comments may take. So that being said, there is a small cause for concern that the current process may not allow for decisions to be made on applications within those new legislated timelines. There's concern that this could result in financial impacts due to Bill 109 and that requirement to refund application fees. So the recommendations outlined in the staff report would seek to proactively address these matters and front load a lot of that review process before an actual application is actually being submitted to the township and those timelines start counting down. So that being said, staff are recommending that a mandatory two-stage pre-consultation process be implemented for those types of development applications that would be subject to those refunding of fees. So the first step, or a stage one meeting, would be very similar to the current pre-consultation process, being an initial meeting to discuss that proposal, identify those required studies and materials, any concerns, those types of items or discussions. The applicant would be able to then take that feedback and start preparing the required documentation or materials. Once that's been completed, the applicant would then submit those materials to the township and request a stage two or a more detailed consultation meeting. The documents would then be reviewed by the township staff and our consultants and provided back to the applicant. An actual meeting would be held to discuss if that is valuable. It's intended that the stage two consultation would determine if the application is in that complete state, satisfying those applicable policy, or if further information would be required. Again, it would front load a lot of that back and forth between the township and the applicants before the actual development application is being submitted. So it's hoped by the time that the actual application is being received at the township, a full review of that proposal has already been taken and the application is in a more true, complete state, ideally expediting that timeline to a decision after submission, hopefully avoiding that need to refund application fees. So as outlined in the report, this would be a newer process for Severn. It may require some sort of trial and error in those initial stages of implementation, as with any new process. It's possible that it may need to be further amended in the future, but this is sort of a proactive attempt to ensure that the existing tax base won't be negatively impacted by potential revenue losses resulting from Bill 109. So further to that point, there would be a need to adjust or restructure our planning fees and charges to fully implement this process. Planning staff will be bringing a report forward within the coming week to special counsel to discuss those items. But that's sort of a general summary of the recommended mandatory pre-consultation process that was outlined in the report. Staff are available for questions. However, I'll turn it over to Brad as he's going to speak to our other considerations outlined in the staff report.
Sorry, Emily, I just wondered maybe because it's in two parts, well, this is fresh. Is there anyone that wants to ask questions on this? On the pre-consultation part? I know we have new counselors and I just wondered if there was any. Yes, Member Burkett.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Emily, for the report. I see all kinds of flaws and holes in it from the province in favor of the developer. Like, even though they've been told to do their studies beforehand, say the MTO doesn't want to comply and waits until the 59th day to possibly come back and talk to the developer. And now it's too late. It's back in our ball court, and there's no way that we're going to be able to review it. Like, is the province aware of this and what the ramifications are? Like, and I see other holes, like with studies that may take more time than the 60 days, even though you've pre-consulted with them. What's to stop the developer from not doing it until the last day to get his refund back? Just a question. I just.
Perhaps, thank you, Councillor or Member Burkett in this case. I will turn it over to Ms. Mandeville for a response.
Through the chair, if I could. Essentially, to Member Burkett's question, that's exactly what's been happening in our current process. And we're not alone in that, right? We have zero control over when an agency would like to comment or how long it takes a developer to respond to comments we provide to them. So essentially what we're proposing to do through this two-stage consultation. So for those of you who aren't aware, right now, and sorry if there's background noise, something's happening outside my office door here. But essentially right now, we have a pre-consultation meeting with someone. It's very early in the process. It's basically a concept. There's typically not a lot of studies done or reports done or detailed design done. We outline the requirements, for example, if they need to submit an environmental study, if they need to submit a functioning servicing report, if they need to submit stormwater. So we kind of outline all those requirements, but there's no guarantee on what kind of quality is given in those reports or the level of detail that would be given in those reports. So right now, when someone applies for something, it may be complete under the Planning Act that lists, certain things you need for a complete application for rezoning, for example, but the quality of that information might not be there in terms of our engineering standards or general industry practices or what we feel meets the Planning Act. So generally speaking, what we do is we get an application and we review it. We hire a peer review consultant if required for something like environmental. They review it. We provide them with comments, and then it's up to the developer to resubmit in order to address those comments, right? We most frequently see that happening with subdivisions, right? We go through many, many resubmissions with subdivisions. So essentially what this two-stage pre-consultation is designed to do is make them submit studies and us review the studies and comment on those studies before they even submit an application. Because then that timeline under the Planning Act isn't ticking during that process, right? And this is something that new Tecumseh and Orillia have just started to implement ahead of the January 1st deadline. And certainly other municipalities in Simcoe County are working on some kind of process as well in order to try and do this. So it's more about trying to front load that ahead of the application process to say that we have to be satisfied with those studies for it to be a complete application rather than you just produce them. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, Member Burkett, that kind of answers your question a little bit, but certainly, I mean, like with many of the recent provincial changes, I think there were a lot of flaws in the design of this bill.
Thank you.
Member Taylor.
Yeah, through the chair to Katie, what's our track record been like? Like, what is the normal, like how often have we missed, would we have missed the deadlines proposed here?
Through the chair to member Taylor's question, it really depends on the application. For example, a simple rezoning, thinking about one of the on-farm diversified uses, or one of the, for example, the home hardware in Washego went through a rezoning, something like that, where we're not asking for a lot of studies and it's a relatively simple application. We've had a few where you add an accessory apartment and an outbuilding. We didn't ask for any studies for those. So as long as you can provide that you have adequate servicing, pretty much we were meeting our deadlines on those rezonings. But something like a subdivision or an official plan amendment, we probably never met the timeline. The County of Simcoe is the approval authority for an official plan amendment. So even if we did it during the timeline, the County of Simcoe certainly wasn't approving it during that timeline. So it really depended on the application. More complicated site plans, even residential site plans, where we were never meeting the timeline of 60 days before, just because, it takes us a good month probably to get comments from anyone who needs to comment, even internally here, Public Works Department or Building Department. So it takes about a month for comments to be received, maybe even 6 weeks. And then, like I said, we give those back to the developer and ask them to address them. And, then it's really up to the developer how much time they take to resubmit. And they know that clock is ticking. And that's why we're trying to change that process now.
Thank you.
Member McIntyre.
Yeah, through the chair, I guess to follow up on Member Burkett's comments, could the developer not slow play this in order to save the fees at the end of the story? A, and B, are they compelled to do a pre-consult with us, or is it? Seems to me that they might want to circumvent that and then just slow play it, and then they get their fees back, their refunds on their fees. And that's one hole that the mayor has pointed out, that Mr. Burkett's pointed out, that I can see among a bunch of holes, and the timeline is 60 days. Am I right on that, Ms. Mandeville?
Go ahead.
Through the chair to member McIntyre's questions, certainly those are holes with the existing process and how the developer may slow play that in the existing process. But what we're proposing here would essentially circumvent all of that by forcing people. So yes, if council passes the pre-consultation bylaw, it would be mandatory that they have to do the pre-consultation process, whereas right now it is not mandatory. Essentially right now there are a lot of ways in which the developer could slow play it and get their money back. However, with this new proposed process, we just don't see that as being as much of an option or as much of an easy situation. I do see that our CAO turned on her camera, so I'm not sure if you wanted to further comment.
Go ahead, Madam CAO.
Thank you, through the chair. We had a good talk about this yesterday, and my guess is the developers don't want their fees back. They want their subdivision agreement. So I don't see them, playing silly with us to get their fees back, because that's such a small part of the cost of what they're doing. They want to work with us and get their subdivision agreement, not get their couple $1,000s back.
Because that's usually their biggest complaint is, can we get this moving? Can we get this moving? Can we get this moving? But now the ball is in their court at the beginning, right, Ms. Mandeville? Okay. All right, Brad, go ahead.
No, sorry, Chair Cox. Yes, correct. So it basically just forces them to do a lot of work before they submit the formal application. Whereas in the past, they had to submit the formal application before they really got a lot of feedback.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions here? Very clear on it? Because if not, you can always get hold of the planning and ask. Okay, Brad, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. So good morning, Chair and members of the Planning and Development Committee. It's nice to see you all this morning. I'm tasked with talking about our site plan control process and the proposed updates to the site plan control bylaw this morning. So site plan control is a tool that municipalities can employ to ensure that proposed developments are properly planned and are compliant with township policy or bylaws, engineering standards, and other applicable legislation. Through this process, applicants are responsible for preparing drawings, studies, and other reports to describe their proposal to the municipality and to its consultants to demonstrate compliance. Such application requirements typically include various reports and plans that deal with items such as accessibility considerations, parking requirements, grading, fencing, exterior lighting to ensure dark sky compliance, and detailed site design such as plantings, road or parking lot line painting, signage, and fire routes. So through Bill 109, the More Homes for Everyone Act, which did receive royal assent in April of this year, it implemented many changes to the Planning Act with respect to site plan control, including enabling municipalities to deem site plan control applications incomplete, where the prescribed information and materials that are required by the municipality have not been provided. It does only allow 60 days to approve site plan control applications and required the refund of application fees where the application is not approved within those 60 days. So in light of the More Homes for Everyone Act of 2022 and the changes implemented to the Planning Act, and with working with our site plan control bylaw for the last 11 years, a number of recommendations are proposed to improve the bylaw, such as referring definitions to the zoning bylaw for consistency, ensuring that all areas of the municipality are designated as site plan control areas, clarifying the exemptions from site plan control. But perhaps the most significant updates to the bylaw deal with establishing complete pre-consultation and application requirements. Further to this, a checklist was included as a schedule to the bylaw to ensure that complete, whether pre-consultation or application requirements, are established up front so that the applicants are aware of such requirements as soon as possible. The recommended mandatory pre-consultation is where these requirements would be outlined for the developer by the municipality. And the township's newly adopted official plan does contain policies related to complete application requirements for site plan control, and that will assist staff in determining those requirements during pre-con. As mentioned, the Act does now only allow municipalities 60 days to approve complete site plan control applications. Therefore, the review of applications to determine whether they are complete is crucial to permitting staff to process complete applications within the prescribed timelines. Should an application be deemed incomplete, the 60-day clock does not start ticking. Under the township's current process for site plan, applicants would normally make their first submission. The township, we would then circulate to internal departments and our consultants, for example, environmental or engineering, and we would then provide these comments back to the developer. The review is to ensure that the report, studies, and plans are appropriate and are based on acceptable industry standards, as well as ensuring that the municipal interests are reviewed through the application. So the developer would normally make one initial submission along with subsequent resubmissions in order to bring the proposal into conformity with the industry standards and until the township is agreeable to the proposal. The number of resubmissions can vary, and as Ms. Mandeville mentioned earlier, it's dependent on the quality of the materials that are provided. Should the plans be approved, the applicant would then enter into an agreement with the municipality, which is subsequently registered on title. The agreement incorporates the approved plans and drawings and includes the provisions for monetary securities to ensure that the works occur in accordance with the agreement and the approved plans. There's also requirements typically for insurance certificates or the postponement of a mortgage. Given the shortened timelines that are imposed by the Bill 109, and that the municipalities are now only allowed 60 days to approve a complete application, Severn's current process for reviewing these applications will need to be amended, as there is no prescribed timelines for the developer to provide a resubmission, as was discussed earlier. For example, on a recent application, staff provided comment on an application in March of this year, and we received a resubmission last week. So that was 9 months later. So under the new legislation, the township would have been required to return 100% of the application fee 5 months ago, even though the amount of time that it takes the applicant to resubmit is not prescribed by the Act and is out of the municipality's control. To address this matter, as Emily described earlier, the pre-consultation process will allow the municipality to front load a lot of the review process to ensure that the reports and studies that are submitted as part of a complete application are generally acceptable to the municipality and adhere to industry and professional standards. By shifting that review to the pre-consultation stage, the 60-day clock to approve the application is not ticking during that time. Additionally, staff are also proposing to implement a provisional approval process for site plan control applications. So this would be where once an applicant has completed the required pre-consultation process and has made a complete site plan control application, staff would then circulate that submission to internal departments and our consultants for review. The comments that are provided by the reviewers would then be turned into conditions, and a provisional approval would be granted to an application, meaning that the development concept would be formally approved, subject to the applicant satisfying the imposed conditions and to address all of the comments. This again would allow for more time-consuming matters or requirements to be completed outside of that 60-day time period and insulate the municipality from the need to return application fees. Staff anticipate that this process will enable the municipality to meet the prescribed 60-day approval deadline imposed by the Act and not need to return application fees, which are collected to ensure that development pays for development and does not burden the tax base. The review process is being implemented in adjacent municipalities as well and has been the subject of much discussion. It's important to note, though, that while Severn staff believe that the recommendation presented is appropriate, it is new and it may require adjustments as it's being implemented. So just in closing, it's important for the committee to be aware of the financial considerations. Should the committee endorse the staff recommendation, it is anticipated that there will be little to no impact on the planning revenues, although these processes are new and are subject to trial and error. Should the committee choose to not endorse the recommendation, planning revenues will be reduced. Planning staff always attempt to adhere to the prescribed timelines of the Planning Act. However, there are instances where it may not be reasonable to expect an approval within the prescribed timeline given the complexity of a development or where the delay is out of the municipality's control. So this concludes staff's presentation on this item, but as always, if the committee has any questions or requires any clarification, staff are available and happy to discuss. Thank you.
Anybody have questions for Brad? Sorry. So Brad, the new OP will probably help us a lot because things will be much clearer and different. Like, I'm not saying it wasn't before, but we did have areas that sort of were like loopholes for a lot of the developers or someone to look at. Does that help us out too?
Yes, if I may, Chair. The township's newly adopted official plan contains a lot more comprehensive policies with respect to complete application requirements. So that will assist us during the pre-consultation stage as well when we're establishing those complete requirements. And it kind of gives us the backbone there for asking for those studies or reports.
Good. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. So the motion reads that planning report number P22-041 regarding mandatory pre-consultation bylaw and updated site plan control bylaw be received, and that the draft pre-consultation bylaw included as attachment 1 be presented to council for consideration at the next available meeting, subject to comments received from the Planning and Development Committee, and further that the draft site plan control bylaw included as attachment 2 be presented to council for consideration at the next available meeting, subject to comments received from the Planning and Development Committee, and further that staff be directed to bring forward a report detailing proposed changes to the user fees and service charges bylaw for consideration of council.
May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by member Brennan, second by member Minnings. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, planning staff, Emily, Katie, and Brad. Moving on to new business, H1. Report from member Taylor, re-floating cottages. Member Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thought I'd bring the committee up to date with these floating cottages threat. It's becoming more and more a reality than a threat. Mayor Burkett and I had attended some meetings with the Floating Cottages Strategy Group, and in that group we've got the Township of the Archipelago, Township of Georgian Bay, Township of Severn, Gloucester Pool Cottage Association, Federation of Ontario Cottage Association, FOCA, Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, and Georgian Bay Association. I've attached for reference a proposed letter to Minister Smith that would hopefully the township could modify to become our letter to Minister Smith. In addition to that, there's a letter from the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative to Minister Smith, and a letter from the Georgian Bay Association to Minister Smith. And the last one was a letter from the Gloucester Pool Cottage Association to Premier Ford. So I'm hoping that this is a multi-jurisdiction problem with the province and the feds. And I think we have to, as a township, just let the appropriate members know that we're not happy with this and these things are not good. So I'm hoping that the proposed letter to Minister Smith be approved by inserting the township's info and signed by the mayor, and CC to our member MPP Jill Dunlop, our MP Adam Chambers, and the Gloucester Pool Association. So I'm hoping that maybe the mayor can add a few points to this issue too. And thank you.
Member Burkett.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just for the new members of council, just to go back a little, Transport Canada, and are we all aware of what these sea cans are? So they're a large sea container that they've actually made into a floating cottage. So as Member Taylor has stated, there are a lot of concerns with the way these are built, where they've been located, and how it's all unfolded. But what Transport Canada has done in all their wisdom is they've designated these sea cans a vessel, if you can believe it. So basically a boat. Not sure how you steer this boat, but both Member Taylor and myself have spoken to Adam Chambers, and when he was first elected, it was one of the red flags that I raised to him that we needed to work on to try and help anyone that's on water to put a stop to what's happening in our rivers and our lakes. I did see him at the Santa Claus parade in Washago, and he assures me there's news to come. I'm not sure what news is coming, but I'm hoping that at the federal level, they'll be able to help us as well. But as it stands today, I'm hoping county or council will support sending a letter to Minister Graydon Smith, who is well aware of what these sea cans entail. And as being the mayor of Bracebridge beforehand, he knows firsthand what kind of a problem these things are. So we're just looking for support to send the letter and maybe circulate it to some of the other municipalities as well.
Member Brennan.
Thank you, Chair Cox. I would just like to express my full support for Member Taylor's request here. It's consistent with our growing need to develop stronger relationships and engagements, both with residents and with the different sectors out there. It's the only way I think municipalities are going to survive in this day and age. And I strongly suspect when it comes to short-term rentals, we'll probably be in a similar boat. So I think he's on the right track. We need to show people that we support support them in these important matters. And we need to let them know that we're working with the people who can make the change as much as we can. I think it's great.
Member Taylor?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, if you look at the letter from the Georgian Bay Association to Premier Ford, you'll see pictures of these sea cans and just how terrible they look. And I want to thank Member Burkett and Member Brennan for doing that. So I'm requesting that if we could agree today, by modifying my first the proposed letter to Minister Smith, that we could insert our information there, and then if approved by the committee today, the mayor could sign it and copy the appropriate people before. So thank you very much.
Member McIntyre.
I believe you're muted, Member McIntyre.
Sorry, but has it been concluded that it's either a provincial or a federal matter? I think it's federal, but and we're now writing to the province. Has it been determined that we're dealing with a federal or a provincial matter here? Perhaps Mayor could help out.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. I think it's both departments, Member McIntyre. What they're doing is they're tying up to Crown land. So they're docking off of Crown land, which is provincial, but they're in federal waters. So I think it's two-part, that both Adam Chambers understands it's a federal issue. And of course, our MPPs need to understand it's a provincial one as well.
Thank you.
Member Brennan.
Yes, through you, Chair, to Member McIntyre. The land under the water is under the administration of the province. So that's where it can get confusion. For instance, there's lots of places where the Crown leases what they call water permits. A lot of marinas sit on Crown land and they have special permits to operate because the water is not the issue, but what's underneath it is very much under the control of the province of Ontario.
Okay. And I read with interest that the auditor was quite upset with the Ministry of Natural Resources due to the fact of invasive species and how they have one person that looks after the invasive species, and they've not made any sort of, since it was initiated. And her concern is that the Ministry of Natural Resources should have pulled staff to do it. And their comment was, we've been cut back so much. So I think this is part of our issue when we have to deal with Graydon Smith and the M&R, is that their staff is cut back hugely. And it's a sad state because they looked after so many things that are not being looked after right now. Anyway, any other comments? Okay, Madam Clerk.
A motion reads that correspondence be sent to Minister Smith summarizing our objections to floating and concerns to floating cottages, with copy to local MP and local MPP in area municipalities.
Just a question on that. I was told that if you CC MPPs, that chances are they don't read them. So could you CC our MPP and our MP and then make sure that they get one sent direct to them? Because that's what I was told when I was looking into another issue with a resident, is that, well, they don't look at CC'd ones. So I don't know if it's true or not, but maybe it should be direct.
You're 100% correct. So anytime I say we're going to CC,
okay,
get their own directly addressed letter.
Okay, thank you very much, Allison. Yes, Member Taylor.
Yeah, just through the chair, Allison, just if you could ensure that the Georgian Bay Association is on there as well. They kind of coordinate the meetings that we attend.
Certainly.
And if you need that email, I can forward that to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I need a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Member Taylor, second by Member Jansen. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And this concludes our first planning meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Madam Chair, I just need a quick motion to adjourn.
Yes.
So this meeting is hereby and now adjourned at 9:37 a.m.
Mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Member McIntyre, second by Member Jansen. All in favor? Perfect. Carried. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll see you.